Welcome to the Breaking Reality Podcast, bringing news and truth to the people.
Welcome to another episode of Breaking Reality. I'm Care. Welcome back to our prior listeners and welcome to the new listeners. We have a lot to get into this evening, so let's get started. So this evening we're going to open with an Epstein case story. Today, a second judge that presided over an Epstein grand jury made a ruling not to unseal the grand jury transcripts as was requested by the Department of Justice. Judge Richard Berman said in his 14-page ruling, quote, "The information contained in the Epstein grand jury transcripts pales in comparison to the Epstein investigation information and materials in the hands of the Department of Justice. The government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files and materials dwarf the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials. The grand jury testimony is merely a hearsay snippet of Jeffrey Epstein's alleged conduct," unquote. So here we have one of the presiding judges who said himself that the grand jury testimony is nothing in relation to the Epstein files as a whole. Now, hearsay in this context of the legal field holds no ground because there's no evidence to the matter. With Judge Berman equating the grand jury testimony to a hearsay snippet, this should let us know that this move is pointless. Then, to take this further, the first presiding judge, Judge Paul Engelmeyer, rebuked Trump in his case ruling on Monday, and in his 31-page opinion, he states, quote, "The government's invocation of special circumstances, however, falls at the threshold. Its entire premise that the Maxwell grand jury materials would bring to light meaningful new information about Epstein's and Maxwell's crimes or the government's investigation into them is demonstrably false. A member of the public appreciating that the Maxwell grand jury materials do not contribute anything to public knowledge might conclude that the government's motion for their unsealing was aimed not at quote-unquote transparency, but at a diversion, aimed not at full disclosure, but at the illusion of such," unquote. So we had a federal judge in Florida decline to release grand jury documents from an investigation in 2005 and 2007. And now we have two federal judges who concur with each other in that the grand jury files mean absolutely nothing in relation to the information that the DOJ and the FBI already have in their possession. So this makes three federal judges denying this same request. Sadly, the Trump Department of Justice has authorized Ghislaine Maxwell to be on work release at a minimum security prison. So to this, of course, we say, release the Epstein files. In our next story, HHS Secretary is being blamed by his own federal department employees for the August 8th attack on the Atlanta CDC campus. Today, Congress received a letter signed by more than 750 current and former employees and organizations of the HHS, stating that RFK Jr.'s words and actions, quote, contributed to the harassment and violence, unquote, that led to the attack that day, and that day being August 8th. The letter further states that Kennedy was, quote, complicit in dismantling America's public health infrastructure and endangering the nation's public health by repeatedly spreading inaccurate health information, unquote. Now, this is a department of the American government, right? We should expect some form of acceptance due to the absolute barrage of misinformation that is constantly being spewed from the mouth of this batshit crazy secretary and team, right? Psych. An HHS spokesperson made a statement that said any attempt to conflate the assurance of safety and well-being to, quote, the violence of a suicidal mass shooter is an attempt to politicize a tragedy, unquote. And to this person and HHS, I say, no, no, it does not. After the incident, authorities looked into the motive, and what was established was that this individual, based on handwritten documents by the shooter himself, thought that he became hurt due to the COVID vaccine and that it was hurting others, so he ended up taking matters into his own hands. Now, whether psychologically or legally, when a cause is identified for an action, that cause is immediately addressed. The cause of this action has been identified as the misinformation and disinformation spread by the current HHS administration. So, no, this isn't a political angle. This is the response to uh, the exact relation to this tragedy. Sorry, I got sidetracked. So, what an idiotic administration we have in every freaking field of our government. And Kennedy refused to give the motive of the shooter in an interview with Scripps News in the days that followed the attack. He offered barely any support for staff during a trip to Atlanta and in public comments, but neither he nor Trump have spoken directly about the motives to the government employees who were actually affected. Now, the letter to Congress has asked Kennedy to, quote, stop spreading inaccurate health information, unquote, to remove the DEI watch list content from the HHS website, and they have actually given him until September 2nd to respond. So when updates are provided to us, I will be sure to provide them to you. Well, today is a day for judges. You may or may not remember that back in June, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill into law called Senate Bill 10 that mandated a 16 by 20-inch framed poster of the Ten Commandments in every classroom by September 1st. Now, thank goodness, Judge Fred Beery stepped in and saved the day by issuing a preliminary injunction, temporarily blocking this from taking effect. Now, Judge Beery found the courage to follow the U.S. Constitution rather than playing follow the leader behind MAGA. He found that Senate Bill 10 likely violates the Establishment and Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment, siding with those of the diverse religious backgrounds that make up the life of Texas. Now, in a statement, Judge Beery said to CBS, quote, the displays are likely to pressure the child plaintiffs into religious observance, meditation on veneration and adoption of the state's favored religious scripture, and into suppressing expression of their own religious or non-religious background and beliefs while at school, unquote. And I absolutely agree with this. One of the things I've been outspoken about since last year is that of Christian nationalism and the New Apostolic Reformation, also known as the NAR, which is more so specifically white Christian nationalism. And for those of you who don't know about this, the NAR is a Christian nationalist movement, which means that they are their version of the Christianity that seeks to make the United States and eventually the world into a nation and a world under their form of Christianity. And this includes what's called the 7M or the Seven Mountain Mandate. These seven mountains are the areas of life and government that these followers believe they are to have complete control over. And multiple individuals who are followers of the NAR are actually in our government and are pushing these principles under the guise of history, heritage, and legacy. And guess what? One of these seven mountains is education. One of the fights that is brought against this freedom of religion and the separation of church and state is exactly what Ken Paxton, the MAGA Texas Attorney General, said. Quote, "The Ten Commandments are a cornerstone of our moral and legal heritage, and their presence in classrooms serves as a reminder of the values that guide responsible citizenship. Texas will always defend our right to uphold the foundational principles that have built this nation, and I will absolutely be appealing this flawed decision," unquote. So again, I say no, this isn't about heritage. This is about control. This is about supremacy. This is about suppression. So thank you to Judge Beery, and I'll be sure to keep a close eye on this story. So just when we think the cozying up between war criminal Netanyahu and our felony convicted president couldn't get more suck-ass, today the Trump administration made the decision to sanction 4 extra individuals, one Canadian judge, one French judge, and 2 prosecutors of the International Criminal Court, also known as the ICC, adding to the list of those who were already sanctioned back in June. Now, in February, Trump signed an executive order claiming that the court had supposedly abused its power by issuing an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. He ordered asset freezes and travel bans against ICC officials, ICC employees, as well as their family members, in addition to anyone who was deemed to have helped the court's investigations. So, why, you might be asking? Well, because these participated in the authorized investigation by the ICC into Israel's involvement in Gaza, as well as the U.S.'s military personnel presence in Afghanistan. With these sanctions in place, the ICC does not have access to the financial transactions or the property that's owned by the United States or owned in the United States. Now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on his X account that the ICC, quote, "continues to disregard national sovereignty and facilitate lawfare through efforts to investigate, arrest, detain, and prosecute Americans and Israeli nationals. We will continue to hold accountable those responsible for the ICC's morally bankrupt and legally baseless actions against Americans and Israelis," unquote. Now, the ICC has condemned the actions of the Trump administration, calling them attempts to undermine the independence of an international judicial institution. Neither of the U.S. nor Israel is part of the ICC. However, the ICC states that they can still issue warrants because the crimes that are quote unquote alleged to have been committed were done where the ICC does have jurisdiction. So let's make this perfectly clear. Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, a child unaliver, the head of the IDF, which is the military of Israel that's committing a genocide of the Palestinian people, unaliving them with the help of United States contractors as the Palestinians are starving, trying to get aid. So just because the United States and Israel are not part of this jurisdiction, that means they don't have to follow the established rules laid out by them. Now, maybe not the best analogy, but sovereign citizenship isn't something recognized within the United States for the citizens, but somehow it applies here on the federal level. I don't know. Maybe somebody can make this make sense. I'd like to know your thoughts in relation to the stories reported today. Of course, don't ever hesitate to reach out.
If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this episode, the host, or the podcast, don't hesitate to reach out at breakingreality@mail.com.